So to start off, some truths about presentations, and these are really going to drive a lot of what I say today. And they're definitely things to keep in the back of your mind when you are presenting, because they will help to shift your mindset in a way that is a little bit more productive and a little less anxiety spiraling for people that, like a lot of people, find public presentations to be stressful. So first and foremost is that you, as the presenter, drive the presentation, and the audience is going to follow your lead. And I say this as a classroom teacher who gets up and does several hours of presentations a day in front of a non-supportive audience, i.e. students. When I first started as a teacher, my very first principal, whose name was also Dawn, she was awesome. And she told me, she said, your enthusiasm for your subject will make your students interested in it too. And I taught in a pretty rough school, and I had a hard time imagining, because of the biases that I came in with, that my students would ever be interested in English literature. But I found that what she said was true, that if you come in and you're excited and you're engaged, then your audience will be excited and engaged as well. Audiences are supportive. Speaking of your audience is going to be supportive. They are not going to ever be out to judge or get you. So thinking about your audience as a group of supportive people that are there and they're really excited to hear what you have to say can kind of reframe things that in the moment can feel stressful, such as someone asking what feels like a gotcha question or a really rambly, poorly worded question. That is not someone like trying to trap you or show that you don't know what you're doing. That's just someone struggling with extemporaneous presentations, just like a lot of people do. So your audience is absolutely going to empathize and be rooting for you to give the best presentation that you can, because it is to their benefit that you do. And finally, and I cannot say this enough, and for anyone that wants to argue with me on this point, I say write this on an actual sticky note and post it somewhere where you are going to see it every day, because it's really important to realize that you are an expert. At this point, you are giving a talk at a conference on something that you have now spent probably dozens of hours researching, thinking about, and writing about. You are an expert. People are excited to hear your expertise on your topic. So don't downplay your own expertise when you're going into this. Keep in mind that you are indeed an expert. You belong here. You have earned your place here. Okay, so also because I'm a classroom teacher, I love little organizational structures and I love little mnemonics and dorky things that I can put on posters and hang in my classroom. And if I were to make a poster about this and hang it in my classroom, it would look something like this: the 3 Ps of presenting. These are some big ideas that emerged as I was putting together all of the notes that I came up with the team, from the team that's been working on these presentations with me. I'm giving these presentations, but there are numerous people who have provided the resources that are behind them, who I will make sure I thank at the end. But these were three kind of unifying factors that came out of it. And they're really rooted in, because I'm a teacher, they're really rooted in brain science, in helping our brains to handle the cognitive and emotional load of giving a public presentation in a way that we can feel comfortable and effective doing so, and maybe even have a little bit of fun. So those 3 things are practice, plan, and prepare. So practice creates, the big fancy word is automaticity. And we accept this when we're, you know, practicing free throws in basketball, or throwing darts, or learning a complicated new sequence in something. We know that we have to practice it over and over again so that it becomes automatic and we don't have to think so much about doing it anymore. And it is absolutely the same with presentations. The more that you practice it, especially those tricky parts to pronounce or say, or those difficult sentences, the more, when you are stressed out in the moment, it will come out correctly, and how you want it to goes up with the more practice that you do. Planning is looking ahead at what to expect, and also things that can go wrong. I will talk a lot about things that can go wrong, even though they're very unlikely to actually happen, just because it is helpful to plan ahead of time for when they do. I'm going to use the term cognitive load several times today. It's basically your brain can only handle doing so many things at one time. This is all brains, right? And so if you're standing up and you're trying to present and you're trying to read and you're trying to manage your technology, and you're nervous slash excited, and you're trying to remember to make eye contact with your audience, and you're trying to remember how to pronounce Einal and Dale, and something goes wrong, then you're less likely to be able to handle it if you're feeling overloaded. So planning ahead of time, when you're not thinking about all of those things, how you will handle the various curveballs that a presentation may throw you, can help make that a more efficient and comfortable thing. And finally, preparing. So, what can you do ahead of time that ensures that you are ready to go and you are averting as many disasters as possible? Okay, so first of all, just a quick um, rundown of what to actually expect on the day of. So you've arrived at the venue, whether that's virtually or in person. So how is this actually going to work? How are you going to go from being an audience member to a presenter in about 3 seconds? This is how it'll work. So first of all, know that you will probably be emotionally escalated. I'm trying to avoid nervous because one of the pieces of advice that I'm going to give is to reframe nervousness as excitement. But most people are nervous about public speaking. Among US adults, there was a study done that shows that this is the number one fear. It's like a third of US adults identify public speaking as their number one fear. So it is, you are not alone. But again, harnessing the power of that brain science, the practice, planning, and preparation will create that automaticity and reduce your cognitive load, which will create essentially a more relaxed presentation and will allow you to take things as they come and not just be piling onto your own stress. So here's what to expect. The five kind of steps of how this will work, and I will go through each of them individually. So first of all, before we even get to this point, then going back to those three P's, I said I was going to be annoying about it. So here I am being annoying about it. Preparation. How can you prepare for this moment? What can you have ready to go when step one happens? So step zero is going to be the things you do ahead of time. And so first of all, use the restroom. It seems kind of silly to tell adults go potty, but it will help. People who are nervous have to pee more readily. So you don't want to be up there and be thinking about your full bladder. Um, Having water on hand. And in-person venues will sometimes provide this, sometimes they don't. So always be sure to bring your own. When people are nervous, they get dry mouth, they get dry throats. And so thinking about how you handle a coughing fit and having the supplies on hand if that happens, because it will always happen at the worst possible time. It will not wait until your presentation is over. It will happen right smack in the middle. So you want to be prepared. So have tissues, cough drops, whatever you need on hand, and then choose comfortable clothing and shoes. So, there's wicked sweet heels, think about what it's like to perhaps walk up and down steps to a stage. A tie or a dress shirt that's maybe tight around the throat. Is that going to be irritating or annoying? Dress for comfort, not for style. If you can find a way to do both, that's awesome. But if not, choose comfort. Okay, so step one, you're going to enter the presentation space, and this is going to look different for in person and virtual, obviously, probably goes without saying. So for in person, then usually there's like a little transition time, and you will come up, or your panel will come up, or your round table, depending on how the presentation is structured. And this is the time where you want to check to make sure that things are right. So you want to check the level of chairs, of mics, of podiums. And this is the time where you elicit the support of your moderator or other organizers who are in the room and making sure those things are adjusted and comfortable for you. That is part of their job. Do not be afraid to ask for help with this. If the microphone's too high or it's too low, and you're going to be stooped down or stretching up the whole time, you're going to be uncomfortable. Your presentation is not going to be as natural and fun as you would like it to be. Same thing with comfort level of furniture. If you need to request a different chair, now is the time to do it. Tables, you know, level heights, such as that. This is the time to rearrange the stage. So for virtual presentations, what this will look like is you will be promoted to a presenter or whatever it's called in the platform that you're using. And here you want to make sure you want to pay attention to your background. It should be minimal, it should be blurred, it should be non-distracting. And something especially to think about for us Spanish people is to make sure that you don't have anything behind you with personal information. Things like certificates, diplomas, family photos that may give information out to the internet at large that you don't want. You want to check for glares from lights and windows at this time. And then also think about the presence of other people and animals that share your space. And you can't always eliminate this entirely. People who have children or pets that require care, people who share a space with roommates, those people and animals may appear. They may make sounds that you just can't avoid, and that's fine. But if that is going to be the case, then sometimes giving a little heads up to your audience that, hey, you may hear a bird chirping, you may hear a dog barking, you may see my roommate walking behind me because they're getting ready for work and they're preparing dinner. Um, just kind of set the stage for those expectations. Okay, the moderator will introduce you. If you've been asked to provide a biography ahead of time, that's what they will read. If not, they'll just give a just basic introduction. If you're asked to provide a biography, my advice is to reply to this as promptly as possible. First of all, no one likes writing biographies. If someone asks for 100 words in third person about me, that is like the hardest 100 words I will write that month. It's like, what do I say? What do I leave in? What do I leave out? But it's good to reply promptly because as you get closer to an event, an organizer is more likely to be focusing on things that they have to focus on close to the event, and your biography is likely to get lost or not printed. It can also help to bring an extra copy just in case the organizer is not as organized as maybe they would hope, so that is definitely something they have on hand. All right, now here you are. It is time to present. The stage has been handed over to you. You have this amazing supportive audience in front of you. You are so prepared. You are so ready. You are so excited. What do you do? What are some ways to make this presentation go as well as you can? So first of all, speak slower than you need to. If you sound slow, like I sound slow to me right now because I talk fast naturally, then you are probably sound just right to your audience. Like time, I'm going to say this multiple times. It's another thing I'm going to repeat a lot and be annoying about is that time distorts when you're presenting. Things that sound really fast to you are not actually, or sound really slow to you are not actually slow. And pauses that seem really long to you are not actually long. Enunciate more than you need to along those same lines. And pause and breathe. So make sure you're doing those things. You're not just rushing everything together because you want to get through and you want to because people are just not going to be able to take that in. Eventually, it's just going to become a stream of words just kind of washing over their brain. So your audience needs think time and pause time just as much as you do to kind of regroup, to kind of take in what you're saying and process it. If you're feeling nervous, one, you probably will be, but reframe it as excitement, not like I'm terrified right now. But I have worked really hard for this. I can't believe it's here. I'm really psyched to present today. And just as I said, you drive your audience's expectations. You drive your own expectations of yourself a lot too. It sounds kind of corny to say, it's the power of positive thinking, but in a lot of cases, it really is. You can reframe heightened emotions, however you choose to reframe that. And if you reframe it as excitement, then it will become excitement in a lot of cases. And you will not find yourself getting wallowed in that anxiety so much as it is, I'm just really excited and I'm going to have a great time. Just keep telling yourself that. So just a heads up that during your presentation, moderators will most often give what we call time checks. So when you're a good moderator will let you know of this ahead of time. They'll say, hey, I'm going to give you a time check at 5 minutes and 1 minute. But not all moderators will remember, they're human too. So just anticipate that you may get a time check from the moderator. This is not that you're behind schedule or that you're doing anything wrong. They're just making you aware of where you are in their schedule. And so you should absolutely be thinking about, your own presentation. If you get a 5 minute time check and you're only halfway through, then you probably need to do some adjusting as you go. So it's useful information to have, but it's also very common, and don't be alarmed if it happens. All right, now we go into Q&A. So this is going to look a little bit different for different types of presentations. So if you're the only one giving a presentation, then you will be the only person a lot of times in Q&A. But more often you're giving presentations as part of a panel or a roundtable, and in those instances, then other people will be involved in the Q&A as well. So the moderator handles calling on audience members and will manage the questions, so you don't need to worry about that. So you can take that right off of your plate of things that you might think you need to prepare, because that is the moderator's job. Good moderators will ensure that each presenter gets a question. So that's the ideal. And it is okay. So again, remembering, as a presenter, you are one of the drivers or the driver if you're on your own in the room. And so if you are up there with other presenters, then you can absolutely ask questions of them as well. It's good to be supportive of each other. You're all in the same boat together, And again, you're driving audience expectations and behavior. So if you all are showing enthusiasm for each other's work and you're asking a lot of questions and discussing it, that's going to bring the audience into that mindset as well. Okay, the wrap up when you're all done. The moderator will also handle this, so you don't need to figure out some flashy finish. The moderator will get you off the stage. Your audience will applaud you, and woohoo, you did it. You have done your first Tolkien conference. You should be super proud of yourself at this time. Take a moment to celebrate this accomplishment because it is truly an accomplishment. Alrighty, so now going back to those three P's. The first one, practicing, getting that automaticity so that the words just flow naturally. And if something happens that kind of catches you off guard, then you're less likely to stumble. That is going to happen with practice. So, how do you actually do that? And part of that is going to depend on the approach that you are taking. So, this is the slide that I showed last time. And it's the two different ways that you can approach actually giving a presentation. So, the most common one, of course, is just reading a written paper. And that is honestly what I would recommend for the vast majority of beginners because it is the less likely to get you into tricky situations. But you can also just give an extemporaneous presentation using notes, which could also be your slides as a guideline. That's what I'm doing right now. And the only caution here, of course, is just to be careful of time because, again, the emotional conditions of a presentation, the emotions are going to be heightened. And for some people who really like giving presentations, that can mean you get like more into it than when you practiced, and you end up taking more time. It can also mean you end up talking faster than you did during practice. And so you end up getting a little bit off one time. So you're going to practice more for the second one around staying in time than you are on the first one. So, speaking of time, time is going to be super, super important. I would say it's the number one thing when you practice because a conference is kind of like a macroorganism. So, you think of it when you're preparing for a conference, you're often thinking of it just in terms of your own 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you have. But in fact, a conference is multiple presenters, multiple sessions, and it also has to meet time requirements. And so when presenters go over, when they use more than their allotted amount of time, that can add up to have negative impacts on people further on down the line. So if when you are practicing, you are finding you are coming consistently in over your time, then you need to cut your presentation. You cannot go over your time. That is a really unfair expectation to put on other presenters because then what happens is their time gets cut or other sessions lose their Q&A sometimes, and nobody wants to be the cause of that. So when you're practicing, be keenly aware that you are coming in under or somewhere around the time that you have. Here you also want to think about things like if you're switching onto different tech platforms, for example, if you're showing a video or you're using some sort of interactive platform like a Kahoot or a Poll Everywhere or something like that, that switching between those things take time. So if you're reading your presentation without that in there and you're coming up at exactly the time limit, you actually do need to cut your presentation because once you add in those transitions, then you will be over time. Practice in chunks. So start with the one that is most challenging or most important and practice that until it starts to feel comfortable. And then move on to the next most challenging or next most important, all the way down to the easiest or least important section that you need until you can do the whole thing. And the reason I recommend doing it in that way instead of just starting from the beginning and going through is that way you're getting more practice and building more automaticity around the areas that are going to be more challenging. It can be a really great strategy to record yourself to check for speed and clarity, and of course, time, because any recording is naturally going to have time in there. It's also really good to practice in front of real people as much as possible. And here, being fandom people, we have the huge benefit that we have a community that is very used to supporting creators in preparing their work. We often think of beta readers, for example, but you can recruit beta readers for a presentation as well. And get a group of fandom friends together on Discord or on Zoom or on Google Meets and deliver your presentation, get their feedback, Just practice in front of real people. You can definitely loop in if you're doing an in-person presentation. It's really helpful to loop in actual live people, family members, friends, because that helps with practicing with things like eye contact a little bit better than just practicing in front of a mirror. Okay, don't read off of slides. So if you're doing one of those extemporaneous presentations, then the only time you should be directly reading off of your slides is if you're giving a quote or a particularly important statement that you really want to emphasize. Otherwise, you should be using your slides as a guide. And I don't see this happen a lot at Tolkien conferences so much as I see it happen at teacher PD. But if I wanted to read what you had to tell me, I would read it. I want to hear you present it, so I don't need you to read it to me. I'm perfectly fine to read for myself. So slides are a guide, not a text. All right, so accessibility. I got into accessibility a lot in the last presentation around how to make your actual presentation accessible. So things like color and contrast, how to handle various disabilities that audience members may have. This is more around the actual presentation, and it's accessibility both for you and for your audience. So thinking first about accessibility for you. As the presenter, you need to make sure that you can comfortably and safely and fully access the presentation space. I would love to say that Tolkien Conference organizers are really good about reaching out about accessibility needs ahead of time. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, although some do, and it's always appreciated when they do. So just know you're going to need to be proactive about this, and you should start thinking about it when the presentation is a ways off, and then also just send a follow-up or reminder as you get closer. So this can be things as much as that you may not think about, like somebody with mobility issues who can't stand in one place for 30 minutes. Making sure that there's a chair that's easily available, that, the moderator isn't running out of the room, looking around for a chair to bring in and a table. Um, if you need a microphone, making sure that that's clear ahead of time. Most presentation spaces will have them, but again, just making sure checking in if you have a communication disability or an anxiety condition where you might need to switch to pre-recorded sections, just making sure that the organizer is clear about that ahead of time so that you can then switch into sections that you have already recorded and give yourself a little bit of a break as far as speaking in front of an audience for an extended period of time. All of those things are okay to ask for. I just want to emphasize again that, you know, one of the great things about the Tolkien community in recent years is that there has been some thinking and some awareness around including more Tolkien fans. And don't think that because you have accessibility needs that that nobody wants to accommodate you. They should absolutely be accommodating you because we want to hear what you have to say. Your voice is wanted in that space. So having a friend in the audience can be hugely comforting when you actually have to give your presentation. So with them having access to your materials and being familiar with your presentation, then they can help you out as you need it, which can be something as simple as passing out papers, which is a real bummer to have to do during your presentation. It takes up time. Or it could be something as, well, I'm having trouble connecting on my laptop here. So my friend also brought their laptop and we can try pulling up my presentation on there. And it eliminates the scrambling around to share and give access. The person already has it. They already have it pulled up. You just swap it out and you rock and roll in theory. So definitely recommend having that backup person in virtual presentations, someone who's willing to kind of act as your assistant in the chat. So if someone asks for links that you've shared, that person can be responding and dropping those links into the chat, can be helpful in a virtual setting. Eye contact. So eye contact is ridiculously stressful for a lot of people, and then people who are neurodivergent may not be able to handle eye contact at all. So first of all, know that eye contact, while ideal, is not required. So please don't feel like if it is going to create extra stress and worry to be perfect with eye contact or make eye contact, take that off of your plate. It is okay to do that. If it is something you do want to try and you're not fully comfortable with it, the strategy to use is to look at people's noses instead of their eyes. For them, it's going to look exactly the same out in your audience. for you, it's going to be far less stressful than that like uncomfortable moment when you lock eyes with someone in the audience, and it can feel distressing for a lot of us. Okay, so then some accessibility tips for your audience. So if you have a presentation that has a lot of clues to follow along with, like that has a lot of short, simple text, that is really good. But could also think about providing a link to the paper itself or the presentation so that people could follow along at their own pace, so that someone who maybe is hard of hearing or has other communication disabilities can then follow along with your paper and kind of move forward and backward as they need to. This can be if you're presenting virtually, you can drop a link. If you are in person, you can put a QR code that people can scan with their phone or their device and have it right there with them. If you're in person, providing a paper copy or making a paper copy available or providing a handout can do the same thing. If you're doing an in-person presentation and you want to make sure your audience has access to closed captions, this is much easier to do in virtual because, of course, you can just click on the closed captions in Zoom. But if you're in person and you know that your audience would benefit from closed captions, both PowerPoint and Google Slides have closed captioning available. There's links to tutorials on how to do this in the SWG reference that includes all the materials for this presentation, which will be linked at the end. And so you can definitely use that. Canva, unfortunately, is not there yet. I'm using Canva right now, or I would switch on the closed captions just to show what they look like. So thinking about your platform too, how you're presenting ahead of time, and what if you want to use that, make sure that your platform is capable of providing it. Okay, some very specific accessibility for the Tolkien fandom or for Tolkien conferences is Tolkien's names. So I say this so many times when I talk to people, not just about presenting at conferences, but just going, because Tolkien was a philologist, and so we all want to do right by his language, and we all worry over pronouncing his names. I am going to say, as I have said probably 1,000 times now, in different contexts, do not angst over pronunciation. Really and truly do not. My first Tolkien conference, I practiced the word Ainulindale probably 500 times so that I would be able to say it because I was worried if I mispronounced. It was on Tolkien's creation myth, so I said it a lot in my presentation. And I was like, nobody, if I say it wrong, no one's going to know what I'm talking about. People are going to think I don't know anything about Tolkien. I'm going to be so judged. And within the first half hour, I heard the name Sauron said 3 different ways. And immediately it was like a weight off my shoulders. Like, it's fine. Everybody says it differently. We have such a vastly diverse fandom with so many different languages, so many dialects of English, so many accents that you are going to hear names in lots of different ways. And that is a benefit of our community. That is a beautiful thing about our community, that we welcome in people from all over the world and from all different language backgrounds. So celebrate that and don't worry about it. But it does mean that sometimes you may be using a name that someone has been pronouncing differently in their own head for the last 15 years. And so it can be immensely helpful to your audience if those names are available on the screen. So if I'm saying Ainulindale, Ainulindale, that's really hard to say multiple times in a row. And someone else is like, Ainulind, I've been singing Ainulindale all of these years. Then they know what you're talking about and they're not struggling to catch up and keep up with you, especially people for whom English is not their first language and they may already be working harder to understand the presentation than a native speaker would be. All right, disasters. I am calling them disasters out of acknowledgement that that is how they feel in the moment. I have presented now at 19 Tolkien conferences, so I've experienced some of these disasters, and they feel really, really stressful in the moment. In fact, to everybody else in the room, going back to that point the second, your audience is going to be supportive. To them, it is just a mishap. It is not a disaster. They are not judging you. They are not thinking like, wow, I can't believe this person doesn't know how to use Zoom. They're more thinking, I feel really bad that this is happening. I hope they get this fixed. And they're excited for your presentation. And so again, you drive the presentation, the audience will follow your lead, and how you handle mishaps that feel like disasters when they come will also drive how your audience responds. And so here I'm going to, I always tell my students, I am not a rules person. I hate making rules, but I am going to suggest a rule here for presenters, especially new presenters. You get one apology per presentation. And really, you shouldn't even do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because when something goes wrong, the inclination can be to over apologize for everything. And again, remembering that you not only drive your audience's expectations, but you drive your own perception of how things are going. When you're apologizing a lot, you're assuming that you're putting your audience out. And that's going to create anxiety. It's going to create stress. In reality, these are minor mishaps. They happen constantly. Anybody that goes to Tolkien conferences will tell you multiple people will struggle with their technology, people will lose their place, lots of things will happen. It is no big deal. It is only feels like a disaster. So not apologizing can help you manage that sense as well. Okay, so tech disasters are the most common kind in my experience, and they really can be mitigated by planning ahead. So, first of all, having multiple copies of your presentation in different formats. And I highly recommend that one of them be on an easily accessible cloud platform like Drive, even if you hate using that particular technology and you take it off of there right away. If your thumb drive fails and your laptop isn't hooking up correctly, then you can always switch over to the organizer's computer and very quickly access that. It can be really helpful if you make it public, even if just for the duration of your presentation. So if the first thing that you do when you step off of the stage or presentation area is take that public access away, then that is totally fair. But if it's publicly accessible, then you can quickly fire off the link to somebody else and they can pull it up on theirs and it can mitigate a lot of problems. Make sure all tech is charged and have chargers on hand. I've learned this the hard way at last year's Oxenmoot because I was presenting on my laptop and reading off my phone, and I was in a very late time slot, and I failed to consider the fact that my phone was going to be pretty much dead by that point. And so when my phone died in the middle of the presentation, that was not a good look because I did not want to run off and go rummaging through the house for my charger. And so I ended up not being able to use my visuals so that I could read off of my laptop instead. So that was a bummer. So I could have prevented that just by having the charger on hand. So lesson learned. I make the mistakes, so hopefully you don't have to. And then building on earlier, just make sure if you have a friend in the audience that's willing to have a copy of your materials, then that can be really kind of a safety net to have that person available. Or share with a moderator or organizer who will be at the session. But then, like I said, it's really easy to just plug in their computer and that they've already confirmed works and rock and roll with that. If you're using tech that is going to be more sensitive or touchier, as I say here, something like collaborative platforms like Kahoot or Poll Everywhere, something like video, anticipate and plan ahead if those things don't work as you expect them to. You don't want them to take up a huge chunk of your time. And so if they're not going how you want them to go, think about how, or they just fail altogether, think about what you're going to put in there instead. And again, coming back to that brain science, that when we're experiencing a lot of emotions and cognition happening in our brains, then deciding what to do in the moment is really, really tricky. And so if you decide ahead of time, if my video doesn't play or doesn't stream correctly through Zoom, then that's 3 minutes that I need to, what can I do instead? If you have that planned out ahead of time, then that circumstance is far less likely to be stressful or detrimental. And then finally, internet access. This is like I feel like the scariest thing that happens when you're presenting virtually is that you lose your internet access. And I speak for this as someone who's off grid, aside from electricity. So I don't have access. I literally cannot access internet that comes through wires like normal people do. And so my internet is very spotty. I've been at times since I've lived here on satellite internet, for example, where my internet cuts out because it's sunny and then my internet cuts out because it's raining. So it's like, well, there's weather, so I don't have internet. So thinking about how to plan for those contingencies, and you may not always have a backup available. If the cell tower goes down, because that's how I get my internet now, then I'm not going to have any means of internet access. So I don't have backups, but most people that live in, developed nations in suburban or urban areas do. And so thinking about those backups and having them ready. So I'm going to present on my laptop using my home internet, but if that were to fail, then I have my phone with a hotspot and I have my phone with my data plan available as backups. And I'm all set and ready to go. I have apps downloaded on those. I've put my login in. I've practiced logging in so I can kind of seamlessly transition if I need to. Okay, if you lose your place while you are presenting, first and foremost, so that can feel extremely stressful in the moment. You're presenting and you're making eye contact and you can feel you're really vibing with your audience, you're engaging them, and then you look down at your paper and you realize you have no idea where you are. Super stressful. So, first of all, manage those emotions by remembering that this is a very common thing to happen. Pause, take a deep breath, do whatever you need to do to keep yourself from going into panic mode. That's first and foremost. It is okay to explain once to your audience that you've lost your place, ideally without apologizing. Something like, whoops, I lost where I am. I'm going to need about 10 seconds just so I can find it. Chances are it's going to take you about four, and then congratulations, you've come in at a higher, better than you expected. But just saying once is okay. You don't have to either, though. It's a very common occurrence. So then you want to look carefully your through your paper, not quickly. You're not trying to be back on track as quickly as possible. You're just very carefully taking your time to find where you were. And here, to go back to that third P, which is prepare, how you prepare your paper. That was a lot of alliteration there. How you prepare your paper can really help with this. So, double spacing, for example, large font, lots of paragraph breaks. I just shepherded a class full of eighth graders graduating from a school that most of them, so they were 14 years old. So they're graduating from a school that most of them have attended for the last 10 years. And some of them gave speeches, and some of the strategies that they used were highlighting keywords. So that way, if they looked up at the audience and lost their place, then they could look back down and just find the keyword where they were. It's a good one too. So preparing ahead of time. And then finally, just remembering that time warp that comes when you're presenting, that you are actually speaking much faster than you sound like to yourself, and time pauses feel about twice as long to you as they do to your audience. Your audience is not put out by you taking a little bit of time to find where you were. You're doing fine. Okay, so if you show up, and this one is, I feel like this one would be a gift for me, but it did happen one time, so it can happen that you show up and the moderator comes up to you and says, "We had a panelist who got sick at the last minute, and so your panel now only has two people, so you could have an extra 10 minutes of presentation time." If that moment makes you feel abject terror, first of all, I'm going to actually jump to my last bullet point here, which is this is actually not your problem to solve. So you don't need to take that time if you're offered it. You could say to the moderator, "You know what? I am good exactly how I prepared. I would love for that time to be given to someone else." But if you do decide, if you do think like, okay, so maybe I would love to have extra time. My presentation's running a little long to start with. So you can always have the option to share extra material if you have it. You can always add extra time to your Q&A. Add some time for a few more questions for you and other panelists if you're up there with other people. That's always appreciated because Q&A very frequently gets cut shorter than we would like. And then if you would like to engage your audience and kind of experiment a little bit with those more like interactive elements, then you can add a discussion question in there around your topic. And you can put that in the beginning or the middle or at the end. And just, hey, before I start, I want to throw this question out to you all. Like, what do you think about this topic? And it'll give you a sense of like what you're going into. It'll, with your audience, we call that formative assessment in education. It'll also like immediately establish that connection and that engagement. So that can be another thing you use that time for. But the reality is that most of the time, especially if you're presenting later in the schedule, you will have less time than expected. And sometimes this is because of something that happened with you, like maybe your technology was really hard to connect and you lost a few minutes. And sometimes it will happen because of the cumulative effects of things that have happened in people's presentations before yours. So it's really good to think ahead if you have less time than you expect and decide where you would cut your presentation and what you would skip. if you could. My recommendations there are introductory material, especially stuff that's designed as background information or hooks, can often come out or be shortened significantly. A lot of times, your more in-depth analysis can be cut out or shortened. You present your evidence, you give some level of analysis, and then you kind of have to trust your audience to take it the rest of the way. That could be something else to cut. I don't recommend cutting conclusions, and definitely don't cut your evidence. Um, you can also, if you have multiple sections, so if you have like 3 or 4 sections to your presentation, you can just cut a whole section. Think about which one is weakest or contributes least to your argument overall, and just eliminate that section if you need to. But again, remembering that in a moment where you already have so much on your mind, cognitively and emotionally, making these decisions will feel really hard in the moment. So thinking about it ahead of time. If I find myself with 5 minutes less than I expect, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle that? And having that plan in place. If you realize that you're behind schedule while you're reading or delivering your presentation, just breathe, be calm, and don't rush. Um, it is far worse to rush through it. Just kind of make your decisions on the fly. And again, if you have to make, cuts or adjustments in the moment and you need to ask the audience, like, I'm going to pause here for just a moment so that I can decide in my last 3 minutes what I would like to share with you. Then no one is judging you. It's okay to do that. And then finally, a lot of times when cuts have to be made to presentations, it's going to come from the Q&A, especially if it's one of those cumulative one of those cumulative tragedies where, multiple problems have kind of mounted up and the conference is significantly behind. A lot of times, unfortunately, Q&A gets cut. So it is worth, especially if you're presenting later in the conference, to think about how you will communicate with audience members who want to communicate with you. I recommend having, if you're comfortable doing so, a final slide that includes your contact information and just letting the audience know, hey, we're not going to have Q&A, unfortunately, but here's my email. Here are my socials. Feel free to reach out with questions. I'd love to hear from you. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can absolutely tell the audience to contact the conference organizer and have them forward questions to you. That is one of their roles. So you're not asking for anything that is onerous or unexpected. So then you would simply say, hey, since we don't have Q&A, if you had any questions or you want to reach out, just send an email to the conference organizer and they will forward it to me. And just make sure you give the conference organizer a heads up that you've done that, just so that they know who to forward it to. Which brings us to the Q&A. The Q&A is in a lot of ways the most stressful part because it's extemporaneous, so it's not planned. If most people are like me, then they spiral in thinking about all of the things that could be said or could go wrong during this time to the point where it could be very anxiety provoking. If you're not nervous about Q&A, awesome, then you're in a really good place. A Q&A is the part that generally made me most nervous when I was a new presenter. So first of all, to prepare that third P, right? So having everything as prepared as possible going in. So it is okay to have audience plants, by which I don't mean, giving everyone in the audience a geranium so that hopefully that they feel positively towards your presentation. I mean that if you have friends in the audience or you have people who it is okay to say, hey, during Q&A, do you mind asking this question? It will allow you to anticipate some of the questions, and it can also allow you to talk about maybe some things that you had to cut out to meet your time limit. So that's okay to do that. To anticipate questions as much as possible, again, leaning on those fandom communities so that you have the opportunity to practice or share your work ahead of time with other fans, and then asking them for feedback along the lines of, if you were in a Q&A, what 2 or 3 questions would you ask about this? And while you're probably not likely to see those exact questions, it might give you an idea of some trends that you're seeing. Like, oh, it's very likely that I'm going to be fielding questions about this particular section. So I know that I need to think a little bit more about how I would answer questions and maybe have some extra evidence on hand if I need it. So it's very normal to be nervous during Q&A. And again, I said this earlier, and I really can't say enough that you are the person who's directing this session. You are at the helm. And so if you're avoiding some of these nervous habits, then your audience is going to follow suit, and your own feelings about your presentation are going to follow as well. So I hear a lot of presenters during Q&A that apologize a lot. So it could be like, I'm sorry, I really feel like I didn't answer your question. Or, oh, I'm sorry, I just rambled. Or, oh, I'm sorry, that answer was so long. Don't apologize. This is really hard to do, and everybody knows that it's really hard to do. No one is expecting you to be perfect. So don't diminish the value of your expertise by apologizing for less than perfection in a setting where perfection is not the expectation. Because again, if you are anticipating, if you are setting up that idea that your audience is going to be upset that you gave a long answer, or your audience is going to be upset that you didn't know the answer, or that you didn't fully answer the question, then you're just going to make yourself more anxious about really what is a fine, you're doing a fine job. So try to avoid doing that to yourself. So as far as some good habits that will set you up for a successful Q&A, to help you understand the question, because your audience members are going to be just as nervous in some cases about asking a question, and people are generally not particularly strong at off the cuff speaking. So you may get some really rambly, hard to parse questions. So, how do you understand that? So, first of all, preparing ahead of time, making sure you have a little notepad or some sticky notes to jot down the big ideas in questions or the main questions, kind of pulling the gist out of what they're saying. It is absolutely okay to repeat back the question to them or to ask for clarity without apologies. So, not, I'm sorry, I didn't really understand what you were saying, but instead, so if I'm understanding correctly what you're asking me, or what I'm hearing that you would like me to say more about is. And it's also okay to take think time. So give yourself 10 seconds to think about it. Like, let me think on that for a second. And what feels like 10 seconds to you will probably actually only be about 3 seconds because of the way time distorts. But you are fine. And, to kind of think and gather your thoughts for a few seconds will actually make your question more efficient and will probably save time in the end. But it is totally okay to need a little bit of time to think. So don't feel like you need to rush right into your answer. Just being aware of time again. If you can keep your answers brief, then do to allow for time for more questions. Less is more. So if a person asks you a question that you can answer in 15 seconds, that is great. That is fine. Don't feel like you need to talk for 2 minutes about that. If someone asks you a multi-part question, it is okay to answer just part of it. So if someone asks you a question that actually has 5 parts, it's okay to pick the part or two of it that you're most comfortable with or that you want to talk about the most. And then saying something like, that was a really in-depth, great question. And to allow for more questions, then I'm going to leave it at that, but feel free to email or reach out if you want to talk more about it. That is perfectly okay to do. Same for any question. It's okay to, if it's a complicated question, to say, look, that is a super complicated answer. I could probably talk for 15 minutes about that alone, but I'm going to try to keep it to 30 seconds just so we have time for more questions. But I'd love to chat more over email or on Discord or wherever your preferred mode of contact is. And then when you're answering questions, again, you are driving this presentation. So it is okay. You are in charge, not the audience. It is okay for you to focus on or emphasize what you want to discuss. So if somebody asks you a question and there's a couple different directions you could take it in, it is okay to spend time talking about what you would like to talk about for your presentation. So how to handle some things that we worry about happening. The Q&A disasters, actually mishaps, but they feel like disasters. So if you don't understand the question, and again, remembering audiences are just as nervous and usually unqualified for extemporaneous discussions as anybody else. So it helps to just rephrase the question back to the answer, to the asker, something like, if I'm understanding correctly, here's what you're asking. And if you still don't understand, then you can answer in the neighborhood of what they're asking. So if someone asks me, if I'm presenting about Feanor and the Silmarils, and someone asks me a super complicated question that I'm like, I don't even really know what they just asked, then I'm just going to give the gist of the topic that I kind of heard coming through and say, I could say at the end, like, I hope that answers your question, but if you still have questions, feel free to email me. This is more of a comment guy, the guy that stands up and is like, well, This isn't a question so much as a comment. So good moderators will cut this guy off, but this gets into tricky social norms, and so not all moderators are going to be comfortable with that. So you can take this in two directions. If your moderator doesn't cut this person off, then you can take this in two directions. One, you can flip this right back on that fella and you can be like, I'm treating this like a question, like you actually asked me a question, and I'm going to talk about something related to what you just said that I want to talk about. So you can treat it like a question. But you're also equally fine to just say thank you and move on to people with actual questions. You don't need to feel the need to elaborate or discuss or debate with that person anymore if you don't know the answer to the question. First of all, let me reassure that this happens all the time. It has happened to me. It has happened to everybody that has done a significant number of presentations. Remembering those three core rules, the second one was that your audience is there to support you. So no one is asking you this to trip you up. You need to reframe in your mind if you're feeling stressed in the moment, like this must mean that I didn't do a good job, that people think I'm a fraud, that I don't belong here. All those imposter syndrome narratives that go through some of our heads when we encounter something like this. No, it is somebody who is sees you as an expert who is capable of answering a challenging question, but no one is going to know the answer to everything. So reframe in your mind, this person is not trying to trick me or catch me up. They are just asking something that they are legitimately curious about and believe that I, as an expert, know the answer to. I don't, in fact. So what do I do? So it's a couple ways to approach that. You can always say, it's a great question. I'm not sure, but I'll look into it, or I'll consider this in future research. It's okay to speculate. So if you're like, I could give a direction in this answer, but I'm not 100% sure, then it's okay to say, yeah, if I were to speculate an answer to that, I'm not 100% sure, but here I go. Don't apologize. So refrain from this as well. And then if you're on a panel and the question is something that other people addressed as well, if it's something that's like way out in left field and you're the only panelist with that area of expertise that you know of, then not a good strategy to take. But if they're asking about something that the other panelists are discussing as well, you can always open it up to the panel. You can say, I'm not 100% sure, but all of us are up here talking about Feanor and the Silmarils today. So do any of you have any insights on this? And that's a great way to be a supportive panelist and open up a question for other presenters to possibly weigh in on. If someone is rude or critical, this is highly, highly unlikely to happen. In 19 Tolkien conferences that I've presented at, I've had one person who treated me in a way as a presenter that I felt was rude. And what they did is when I reached the point in the question where I was elaborating on it to provide more information for people who necessarily weren't experts in Tolkien's narrators, then this person cut me off. They said, "Okay, well, that answered my question." And that's the only time that I've been treated rudely in 19 presentations. So chances of that happening extremely slim. But if they were, to be clear, to be critical in this context is also to be rude. It is inappropriate at a conference after someone has presented to critique the argument that they gave. So if someone does that, know that they are being rude. Everyone in the audience will know that they are being rude. So it is not on you to manage that. It is not on you to feel like you need to rescue your point from this person who made a stronger argument. It is not on you at all. The audience will know this person is violating social norms. So good moderators again will handle it, but any sort of like social norm violation automatically gets into uncomfy territory, and not everyone that moderates is going to do this particularly well. My recommendation is just don't dignify it with a response. Say thank you and move on. And again, remembering through this that it reflects on them, not on you. And the audience knows this. And that brings me to the end. So the QR code here will be where all handouts, the slideshow, and the video, when it is available, will be posted. But I also want to shout out the team of people that helped me put together this series of presentations. So Janeway's Admirable Monster, Zara Khan, G, and Himring were all invaluable contributors throughout this entire series, sharing resources that they share with their own students, with me, so that I could pull them out and repackage them here. A lot of what's in here today comes from this group of people and giving their own advice as presenters, as scholars. and how they handle different situations, always looking over my work for me and telling me where I needed to add things and giving additional suggestions for what I could add. So I am so grateful to all of them for their help over these months in making this series happen.